You were probably scrolling through your feed that week, watching a cat video, reading about the US elections, or maybe checking the weather. But while you were doing that, hundreds of people were being killed on the streets of a country you might not even realize was voting. The last week of October 2025, Tanzania's election week became one of the darkest chapters in modern African history. On paper, it was democracy in action campaign posters. Everywhere, ballot boxes set citizens lining up to vote. But behind that fragile illusion was something else entirely, a brutal crackdown, mass arrests, and a blackout that silenced a nation of 68 million people. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, once celebrated as a symbol of progress, announced a staggering victory. 98% of the vote, while her main rivals sat behind bars and protesters were shot in the streets for demanding fairness. Witnesses said the army opened fire on crowds in Dar es Salaam and Mwanza. Opposition figures spoke of mass graves, internet shutdowns, and bodies disappearing overnight. Yet the world's reaction was silence, even from Washington. The Trump administration didn't call for an investigation, didn't send envoys, didn't condemn the killings. Instead, it issued a travel advisory as if mass murder was just another reason to reconsider vacation plans. So here's the question that echoes far beyond Tanzania. When democracy dies in the dark and America says nothing, what message does that send to the world? Because this isn't just about one African election. It's about whether human life still matters more than politics. It's about what we choose to ignore and who pays the price for our silence. If you believe that truth is louder than propaganda and that democracy deserves more than a travel warning, subscribe and stay with us, because this story might change how you see the world. At first, it seemed like Tanzania was finally turning a page. When Samia Suluhu Hassan became president in 2021, after the sudden death of her predecessor John Magufuli, she was welcomed with cautious hope. She was the first woman to lead the nation's soft-spoken but determined, promising a new dawn of openness and reform. For a brief moment, the world believed her. She released journalists from prison, reopened political discussions, and called for reconciliation. But beneath that calm tone, something darker was taking shape. By 2024, the same government that once preached unity had turned into a machine of fear. Opposition politicians began disappearing, newspapers were threatened, even social media users were arrested for comments online. Human rights groups started calling it a wave of terror, and then whispers about Abdul Halim Hafi Amar, the president's own son. According to opposition members and NGOs, he was not just an observer, he was the shadow behind the scenes. Victims claimed his men ran secret detention centers where critics were tortured and forced to disappear. Some never returned. The fear became so deep that families stopped speaking their relatives' names in public. In the middle of this climate stood Tundu Lissu, a man who had already survived the impossible. In 2017, gunmen shot him 16 times outside parliament. He barely lived. After years of exile, he returned home in 2024, determined to fight for democracy. His message was simple: no reforms, no election. On April 3, 2025, Lissu addressed thousands of supporters in the southern town of Mbinga. The crowd cheered as he called for an independent electoral commission and fair rules for all parties. 6 days later, police stormed another rally, fired tear gas, and dragged Lissu into a van. He was driven more than 1,000 kilometers overnight to Dar es Salaam. The next morning, he was charged with treason, a non-bailable offense that carries the death penalty. His crime: posting online that Tanzanians should boycott a rigged election. While Lissu sat in a dark cell, his party Chadema was dealt its final blow. On April 12th, the National Electoral Commission disqualified the party entirely. Their excuse: Chadema had failed to sign a code of conduct document on time. Overnight, the main opposition was erased from the ballot. The message was clear: the election would have only one outcome. Hassan's other main challenger, Luhaga Mpina of the ACT Wazalendo Party, was also disqualified after a sudden legal objection. By mid-April, Tanzania had no real opposition left. What was supposed to be an election had become a coronation. Then came the blackout on information. Foreign journalists were denied entry or accreditation. CNN's Larry Madowo publicly stated that Tanzania no longer tolerates independent reporting. The government didn't want cameras, microphones, or questions, only applause. When Election Day arrived, October 29, 2025, the tension was unbearable. Across Dar es Salaam, Mwanza, and Arusha, polling stations stood half empty. People whispered that voting was useless. The results are already written. Others stayed home out of fear. But when the official results were announced just 3 days later, the numbers shocked even the loyalists. Samia Suluhu Hassan had won 97.66% of the vote in every single constituency. According to the government, nearly 32 million people had voted, an 87% turnout, almost triple the participation of 2020. The math didn't add up. Witnesses described abandoned polling stations. Hospitals, not ballot boxes, were full that week. What began as an election had turned into a national nightmare. The images that leaked through the digital blackout showed soldiers firing into crowds, smoke rising over city blocks, and ambulances weaving through chaos. For many Tanzanians, October 29th wasn't a day of voting, it was a day of mourning. And yet, as the smoke cleared, the government smiled for the cameras. President Hassan stood before her supporters, thanking citizens for their trust and unity. Outside, the streets were silent, except for the echo of gunfire that still haunted the night. By the time the polls closed, the illusion of democracy had completely collapsed. The tension that had been building for months exploded into rage. Dar es Salaam, Tanzania's largest city, was the first to erupt. Protesters, many of them young, flooded the streets shouting, "We want our country back." They tore down campaign posters of President Samia Suluhu Hassan and set fire to government buildings and police vehicles. From Mwanza to Mbeya, the air filled with tear gas and gunfire. Witnesses later described the sound of automatic rifles echoing through neighborhoods as soldiers moved in formation. The Army Chief General Jacob Mukunda appeared on state TV calling the demonstrators criminals, promising to restore order by all necessary means. Hours later, the internet went dark. Within minutes, mobile data was cut, WhatsApp, X, Facebook gone. News websites went offline. The blackout wasn't just digital, it was moral. Nobody inside or outside Tanzania could see what was really happening anymore. But fragments still escaped. Videos smuggled through VPNs showed civilians running from armored vehicles. Others captured the screams of mothers clutching their sons' lifeless bodies. One clip, verified by NetBlocks analysts, showed a group of soldiers forcing people to the ground before the camera cut abruptly to black. By October 31st, the Chadema party began compiling hospital reports. Their spokesperson, John Koka, announced that at least 700 people had been killed in just 3 days. 350 in Dar es Salaam, he said, his voice trembling. 200 in Mwanza, the rest scattered across the country, but the government said nothing. State TV broadcast music and reruns of cooking shows while the streets burned. Meanwhile, reports from medical workers painted an even grimmer picture. Doctors described patients arriving with gunshot wounds to the chest, abdomen, and head, many already dead. Hospital morgues were overflowing. In Mwanza, the regional hospital had to use refrigerated trucks to store bodies. Then came the most chilling accusation. Brenda Rupia, Chadema's communications director, told CNN that security forces were blocking families from retrieving their loved ones' bodies. They are hiding the evidence, she said. More than 400 corpses have been taken away in trucks. We believe they are being dumped in forests outside the city. Satellite images would later show signs of fresh soil disturbances near military zones outside Dar es Salaam, but no investigation was ever allowed. As the death toll rose, international organizations scrambled to verify what was happening. The United Nations confirmed at least 10 deaths, a number so low it felt insulting to those watching their communities vanish. Amnesty International said they had credible information of more than 100 people killed, but admitted they couldn't verify the full scale because of the government's total media lockdown. One journalist asked the Tanzanian interior minister on live television, "Can you tell us how many people have died?" The minister replied, visibly irritated, "At the moment, nobody can say until we collect all the data. Let's wait for authorized information." Authorized information. That phrase became a cruel joke among Tanzanians. On November 1st, the Electoral Commission made its final announcement: Samia Suluhu Hassan, 97.66% of the vote. Every district, every seat, every region. It was the cleanest sweep in Tanzanian history and the bloodiest. Across the country, funerals were held quietly at dawn with soldiers watching from a distance. Families buried their dead in secret, whispering prayers they dared not say aloud. And when the president finally reappeared 3 days later, it wasn't at a public rally or Parliament Hall. It was inside a military base surrounded by officers in uniform. Cameras were barred. Ordinary citizens weren't invited. She took the oath of office behind closed doors and in a chilling calm addressed the nation. Yes, people have died. But we must remain united. Foreigners want to destabilize our peace. Outside, mothers still searched for their children. Inside, the president smiled and raised her hand in salute. That moment marked the peak of Tanzania's tragedy, the day democracy was buried under the sound of marching boots. When the gunfire stopped, silence took over, a heavy, unnatural silence that stretched across the nation like a shroud. Tanzania. The country once hailed as one of East Africa's most stable democracies, now felt like a vast, open prison. The elections were over, but the fear had just begun. Daily life collapsed overnight. Schools remained closed. Markets were empty. In Dar es Salaam, soldiers patrolled intersections that once bustled with taxis and vendors. The government imposed a strict curfew, and anyone caught outside without permission was detained. Hospitals overflowed not only with the wounded, but with relatives begging for news of their missing loved ones. Entire neighborhoods whispered of mass graves. A mother from Mwanza said she had searched 6 hospitals only to be told her son's body was collected by security forces. Another father recounted how police demanded a bribe just to let him look at the morgue. Many families never found closure. Their children vanished into the earth without a name, a coffin, or a prayer. Meanwhile, opposition leaders were silenced one by one. Tundu Lissu remained in prison isolated and awaiting trial for treason, a charge that could end in execution. His lawyers were denied access for weeks. Members of his party, Chadema, were either arrested, forced into hiding, or fled across the border into Kenya and Uganda. Those who stayed behind held a silent week of mourning. Black flags fluttered in neighborhoods, a wordless message that the country was grieving. On social media, when it briefly returned, hashtags like Yana Tanzania Massacre and Yar Justice for Lissu trended before being swiftly deleted. The government warned citizens that spreading panic online could lead to treason charges. Even hospitals were instructed not to release casualty numbers without approval. The psychological toll was staggering. Doctors reported a spike in trauma-related disorders, especially among women and children who had witnessed shootings. Clergy members said church attendance dropped dramatically. People were too afraid to gather. Teachers described classrooms half empty as parents kept children home fearing another crackdown. But the silence was also strategic. President Hassan's administration launched a campaign called Peace and Progress, framing the massacre as a necessary defense of stability. State media aired patriotic songs and documentaries praising her historic leadership. Ministers declared that foreign agents had tried to sow chaos. The government even released choreographed videos of soldiers planting trees and rebuilding damaged schools, a macabre attempt to rewrite the narrative while the ground was still stained with blood. In the halls of power, the balance of governance had shifted completely. The ruling party CCM emerged stronger than ever, controlling every seat in parliament and every level of local government. Without opposition oversight, the president moved swiftly to consolidate power, dissolving several independent watchdog agencies, expanding the national intelligence budget, appointing loyalists as judges and regional commissioners. Within months, Tanzania had effectively become a one-party security state. Yet even within government walls, fear lingered. Officials whispered that the military, emboldened by its central role in the crackdown, now wielded more influence than the civilian cabinet. Tanzania's democracy hadn't just been hijacked, it had been militarized. The regional consequences were immediate. Neighboring countries like Kenya and Zambia expressed concern but quietly tightened their own surveillance laws, citing the Tanzanian precedent. Across East Africa, the message was received loud and clear. If a president can crush dissent and still be recognized internationally, then democracy is only a slogan, not a standard. And so beneath the calm surface, a quiet terror took hold. Ordinary Tanzanians carried on with life selling food, teaching children, tending farms, but the unspoken truth hung in the air. The cost of speaking out was death. The reward for silence was survival. While Tanzania descended into chaos, the world's most powerful nations looked away. In Washington, the response was as brief as it was chilling, a travel advisory. On October 30, 2025, the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam released a short notice. Due to reports of unrest, U.S. citizens are advised to remain indoors. And that was it. No statement from the White House, no call for accountability, no condemnation of the killings, just one bureaucratic warning, as if the death of 1,000 Tanzanians was merely a logistical inconvenience. A day later, the State Department quietly raised Tanzania's travel level from 2 to 3, reconsider travel due to unrest, crime, and terrorism. The document also included a line about targeting of LGBT individuals, but not a single sentence about mass killings or election fraud. For the families burying their dead, this wasn't neutrality, it was betrayal. The silence fit a pattern that had begun earlier that year. In February 2025, soon after taking office, President Donald Trump suspended all U.S. development assistance for 90 days, freezing funds for HIV treatment, education, and democracy programs across Africa. The official reason was budget review, but critics said it signaled the end of America's moral leadership abroad. When Tanzania's crisis erupted, Washington chose isolation over involvement. No sanctions, no special envoy, no emergency UN session called by the U.S. delegation. Instead, the administration cited its America First doctrine, avoiding interference in the internal affairs of sovereign nations. But to Tanzanians, that language sounded cruelly familiar. It was the same justification their own government used to shoot protesters: don't interfere. In contrast, Canada, Norway, and the United Kingdom issued a joint statement condemning the excessive use of force and calling for restraint. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed deep concern and urged an independent investigation. The African Union, which rarely criticizes its members, said it was extremely troubled by reports of hundreds of deaths. Yet, without the United States, the nation that still claims to defend democracy worldwide, these words carried little weight. No investigation followed, no tribunal formed. The victims' names faded from headlines within days. And still, state media in Tanzania seized the silence as validation. If America wasn't condemning the election, then surely they said the world accepted it. That message resonated far beyond Dar es Salaam. Across Africa, governments with fragile democracies watched carefully. Leaders in Cameroon, Uganda, and Zimbabwe saw that a president could win 98% of the vote, jail the opposition, kill protesters, and still receive foreign aid. In that sense, America's silence became the loudest statement of all. It told the world that human rights were negotiable, that democracy was a brand, not a belief. For older Americans who remember when the U.S. stood up to dictatorships in Latin America or the Balkans, the change felt jarring. Tanzania's tragedy exposed a deeper truth. When great powers stop defending moral principles, smaller nations pay the price. And as the blood dried on the streets of Dar es Salaam, the question lingered not just for Africa, but for all of us. If America no longer speaks for freedom, who will? In the weeks that followed, Tanzania tried to return to normal. Markets reopened, buses ran again, and the news anchors smiled as if the blood had been washed away. But beneath that uneasy calm, the truth still burned in the silence of the families who never found their children, in the fear of journalists who deleted their notes, and in the whispered prayers of a nation still haunted by gunfire. The tragedy of Tanzania wasn't just the massacre itself. It was the world's decision to forget it. In an era of constant noise, trending topics, viral outrage, breaking news every minute, real suffering disappears faster than a headline refresh. And when the world forgets, dictators learn they can do it again. That's the real danger. What happened in Tanzania could happen anywhere democracy is reduced to a ceremony, where elections are performances, not choices, and where the right to protest is treated like a crime. The Tanzanian government called it restoring peace. But for thousands of families, peace meant silence, and silence meant survival. In Dar es Salaam, the soldiers have gone back to their barracks, but their presence still lingers in every conversation. People lower their voices in cafes, glancing over their shoulders. Teachers tell students not to talk politics. Parents warn children not to ask about the missing. It's the kind of quiet that only exists after a country has seen too much. And yet the question remains, where was the world's conscience? When the United States, once the loudest voice for democracy, looks the other way, it tells every authoritarian across the globe, you can kill in the dark and no one will stop you. Tanzania's silence today could become Africa's tomorrow, or even the world's next headline. This isn't only about Tanzania or Samia Suluhu Hassan or even the Trump administration. It's about what happens when truth becomes optional and compassion becomes inconvenient. Because democracy doesn't die in one country, it dies everywhere people stop caring. So the choice now belongs to us, to you. Will we scroll past the suffering, or will we remember it? Will we share the truth even when it's uncomfortable? If you believe that stories like this deserve to be heard, if you believe that the people of Tanzania, of Africa, of the world still deserve justice, then don't stay silent. Please share this story. Comment if you still believe democracy means accountability. Subscribe if you believe truth must never be buried, not in the dark, not in silence, not anywhere. because silence killed Tanzania's democracy, and silence, if we allow it, could kill ours too.